At 7 o'clock on the morning of March 30th, 1945, Major General Maurice Rose sat upright in the front passenger seat of a dusty reconnaissance jeep, his eyes fixed on the narrow forest road winding south of Paderborn, Germany. Dawn had broken only minutes earlier, but the tall pines lining the road still held the night in their shadows. The cold spring air carried the faint scent of smoke and churned earth. Somewhere ahead, hidden among the trees, German armor waited. Rose did not look away. At 45 years old, he was already a legend among the men of the 3rd Armored Division. He had spent 28 years in uniform, rising through the ranks not by politics, but by action. He was the highest-ranking American officer in Europe who insisted on leading from the very front. He believed commanders had no right to ask men to face danger they themselves would not face. This morning was no different. His small convoy, just a handful of jeeps and light vehicles, moved cautiously forward along the forest road. Behind them, columns of Sherman tanks and half-tracks from Task Force Wellborn followed at a distance. Intelligence reports had warned that elements of the German 116th Panzer Division had slipped into the woods overnight. At least 4 Tiger tanks, some of the deadliest armored machines ever built, were believed to be positioned somewhere ahead. The Tigers were not defensive weapons. They were hunters, and they were waiting. Rose rested one gloved hand on his thigh, calm and steady. His aide, riding in the rear seat, watched the trees nervously, knowing how exposed they were. The general had been advised repeatedly to let armored scouts move ahead. It was standard procedure, safe procedure. Rose had refused. He always refused. Because Maurice Rose did not believe in safety. He believed in momentum. He had earned that belief the hard way. 7 months earlier, in August 1944, the 3rd Armored Division had been stalled in France. Its advance had slowed under fierce German resistance. Tank losses had mounted. Morale had begun to falter. First Army needed a commander who would restore speed and aggression, someone willing to push forward regardless of risk. They chose Maurice Rose. He took command on August 7, 1944, in the middle of active combat. He did not wait for briefings in rear headquarters. He went directly to the front lines, standing beside tank crews still smelling of cordite and burned oil. He gathered his combat command leaders and told them plainly. They would not stop. They would not hesitate. They would lead the advance into Germany itself. Some officers admired his confidence. Others thought he was reckless. Within weeks, the division began moving faster than anyone thought possible. They called themselves Spearhead, and Rose made sure they lived up to the name. He refused to command from safety. While other generals established headquarters miles behind the fighting, Rose positioned himself within rifle range of enemy lines. He rode at the front of armored columns, exposed to artillery and sniper fire. When engineers hesitated before crossing bridges that might be mined, Rose crossed first in his jeep to prove they were safe. His corps commander, General J. Lawton Lightning Joe Collins, warned him repeatedly. "You're too valuable to risk like this," Collins told him. Rose ignored the warnings. He believed commanders were valuable only if they led, and his men followed him because of it. On September 12, 1944, the 3rd Armored Division crossed into Germany near the town of Recken. They became the first American armored division to breach the German border and penetrate the Siegfried Line, the massive system of concrete fortifications Hitler had promised would stop any invasion. The cost was terrible. German 88mm anti-tank guns tore through Sherman tanks with ease. Their shells penetrated American armor at ranges far beyond what Shermans could effectively return fire. Tank crews often had to close within 500 yards just to have a chance. By late September, the division had lost 41 Sherman tanks in just 3 weeks. Many of the men inside them had died where they sat. But Rose never slowed. He could not afford to. When Germany launched its massive counteroffensive in December 1944, the Battle of the Bulge, the 3rd Armored Division was rushed north into Belgium. Snow and ice covered the battlefield. Visibility dropped. German armor surged forward in a desperate attempt to split Allied forces. Rose pushed his division directly into the path of the German advance. For 2 weeks, they fought in brutal winter conditions. Tanks froze. Engines failed. Men died in the snow. But they held. By the end of the battle, the 3rd Armored Division had destroyed 98 German tanks. The German offensive collapsed. And Rose's reputation grew even stronger. He was no longer just aggressive. He was unstoppable. In March 1945, his division entered Cologne, Germany. The city was a shattered ruin of collapsed buildings and smoking rubble. German resistance continued even after American forces secured most of the city. Snipers remained hidden among the wreckage. Rose moved through the streets anyway. He refused to hide. On March 7th, American forces raised their flag over Cologne. Rose stood in the open, watching it rise, fully exposed to enemy fire. He did not flinch, because Maurice Rose had never asked his men to do anything he would not do himself. Now, 23 days later, he had ordered the boldest advance of his career. On March 29, 1945, he pushed the 3rd Armored Division on a 90-mile sprint toward Paderborn. They moved faster than any Allied armored division had ever advanced inside enemy territory. It was a gamble designed to trap German forces in what would become the Ruhr Pocket, the final destruction of Germany's remaining armored strength. It worked, but it also exposed them. German forces regrouped overnight. Elements of the 116th Panzer Division moved into the forests south of Paderborn. They positioned Tiger tanks along narrow roads and choke points. They prepared an ambush. At dawn on March 30th, Maurice Rose climbed into his jeep and drove straight toward them, because that was how he had always led. He did not yet know that within hours, he would face the most dangerous moment of his life, and history would remember what happened next. On September 12, 1944, Major General Maurice Rose stood on a muddy ridge overlooking the German frontier near the town of Recken. Below him, Sherman tanks of the 3rd Armored Division rolled forward into the teeth of Hitler's most formidable defensive system, the Siegfried Line. For years, German propaganda had called it impenetrable. Concrete bunkers, anti-tank obstacles, minefields, and fortified gun positions stretched across western Germany like a steel spine. It was designed to stop any army that dared cross into the Reich. Rose watched as his tanks advanced toward it. High explosive shells slammed into bunker apertures, throwing up clouds of dust and shattered concrete. Infantry followed close behind, moving in short bursts from crater to crater. Flamethrower teams crawled forward under covering fire, their fuel tanks heavy on their backs. Explosive charges were placed against bunker walls. German defenders responded instantly. 88mm anti-tank guns opened fire from concealed positions, their rounds slicing through the air with terrifying accuracy. Panzerfaust rockets streaked from hidden trenches, exploding against Sherman hulls in bursts of fire and metal. One Sherman erupted into flames, its turret hatch flying open as the crew scrambled out. Rose did not look away. He never did. By nightfall, American infantry had reached the outer fortifications. Bunkers that had stood untouched for years were now shattered and silent. The Siegfried Line had been breached. For the first time since its construction, Allied armor had broken through Hitler's Western Wall. News traveled quickly. Within hours, General Dwight D. Eisenhower himself sent congratulations to Rose and his division. The psychological impact was enormous. German troops had been told the Siegfried Line would stop the Allies indefinitely. It had fallen in a single day. But Rose understood something many others did not. Breaking through was only the beginning. Breaking out would be far harder. East of the Siegfried Line, the terrain favored defenders. Dense forests, narrow valleys, and small villages filled with stone buildings created perfect defensive positions. German forces withdrew in good order, establishing new lines every few miles. Progress slowed to a crawl. Instead of advancing miles per day, Rose's tanks now moved forward yard by yard. German Panthers and Tigers dominated the battlefield. Their guns could destroy Shermans at ranges where American crews could barely see them. Their armor resisted most American rounds unless fired at close range. Tank losses mounted steadily. By late September, Rose's division had lost more than 40 Shermans. Replacement tanks arrived from depots in France. Replacement crews followed, but experience could not be replaced overnight. Veteran crews knew how to survive. New crews did not. Rose adapted. He encouraged his officers to innovate. Shermans began advancing in groups, coordinating fire to overwhelm individual German tanks. They used hills and forests for cover, minimizing exposure. Artillery was called in before entering open ground, forcing German defenders to reveal themselves. Rose's orders were simple. Find a way forward, or die trying. Autumn brought rain. Mud swallowed roads. Supply trucks became stuck. Fuel deliveries slowed. Ammunition grew scarce. Air support became unreliable as weather grounded Allied aircraft. By mid-October, the 3rd Armored Division had reached positions within 20 miles of Cologne. Then everything stopped. Ammunition shortages forced a halt. Artillery units were limited to a fixed number of shells per day. Without artillery, tanks could not advance safely. Rose protested immediately. He contacted Corps headquarters, demanding resupply. General Collins gave a blunt answer. Everyone was waiting. Supply lines stretched hundreds of miles back across France. Trucks could not move fast enough to support the entire Allied front. Rose had no choice. His division dug in near Stahlberg. German counterattacks began almost immediately. Artillery shells fell day and night, targeting Rose's forward positions. Infantry assaults followed, probing for weaknesses. Rose established his command post in a damaged building less than 2 miles from the front line. His staff begged him to move. He refused. He said he needed to see the battlefield. His presence became legendary among the men. They spoke of a general who lived where they lived, who faced the same danger they faced. They would follow him anywhere. Then, on December 16, 1944, Germany launched its final gamble. The Ardennes Offensive. More than 200,000 German troops and nearly 600 tanks surged forward through Belgium, aiming to reach Antwerp and split Allied forces in half. American units were caught completely off guard. Entire regiments collapsed. Rose received orders to move immediately. His division drove north through snow and ice, engines roaring through the frozen night. Visibility dropped to near zero. Roads were coated in ice. Still, they advanced. By December 19th, Rose's tanks reached defensive positions near Houffalize, Belgium. German armor was already approaching. Panthers and Tigers pushed forward, supported by infantry. Rose deployed his tanks at key road junctions. He knew the Germans had to pass through his sector. He told his commanders they would hold, no matter what. The first attacks came on December 20th. German tanks emerged through snow-covered forests, firing as they advanced. Sherman crews returned fire immediately. Explosions echoed across the frozen battlefield. By nightfall, 17 German tanks burned in the snow. 12 Shermans were gone. The fighting continued for days. German forces probed constantly, searching for weak points. Rose moved reserves personally, driving forward to observe enemy movements. On December 23rd, the weather cleared. American fighter bombers appeared overhead. Thunderbolts descended on German armor, firing rockets and bombs. German tanks exploded under the assault. By Christmas Day, the German offensive had stalled. They had failed. The 3rd Armored Division had stopped them. The cost was terrible. 98 German tanks destroyed. 41 Shermans lost. Hundreds of American casualties. But the line had held. Germany had lost its last chance to win the war. In January 1945, American forces began pushing forward again. The German army retreated steadily. By February, Rose's division crossed the Roer River and advanced toward Cologne. The city stood before them, Germany's 4th largest. Capturing it would open the road to the Rhine. German forces fought desperately to defend it. Ruined buildings became fortresses. Panzerfaust teams hid in basements and upper floors, waiting for American tanks to pass. Every street was a battlefield. Rose moved his command post forward into a captured German bunker less than a mile from the fighting. Artillery thundered overhead. Machine gun fire echoed through the ruins. Still, he remained at the front. Because Maurice Rose believed victory belonged to those willing to stand closest to danger. And soon, he would lead his division into the heart of Germany itself. By early March 1945, Major General Maurice Rose had brought the 3rd Armored Division to the gates of one of Germany's most important cities, Cologne. For 5 days, the division fought its way forward through shattered streets and broken stone. Every building was a fortress. Every intersection a killing zone. German infantry hid inside basements and upper floors, armed with Panzerfausts capable of destroying Sherman tanks at close range. Rose remained near the front throughout it all. His staff recorded that he personally visited forward observation posts multiple times each day. He watched German defensive patterns, studied their counterattacks, and adjusted his division's assault plans in real time. He refused to command from safety. He commanded from danger. Block by block, the Americans advanced. Sherman's blasted apart barricades. Infantry cleared buildings room by room. Artillery pounded German strongpoints into rubble. German resistance was determined but doomed. On March 6th, cracks began to appear. German units withdrew in disorder. Supply lines collapsed. Communications failed. By March 7th, American troops entered the heart of Cologne. German forces retreated across the Rhine River, destroying the Hohenzollern Bridge behind them in a massive explosion. Steel collapsed into the water below, severing the last escape route. That afternoon, Rose reached the western bank of the Rhine. He stood overlooking the river that had once symbolized Germany's strength and security. Now it marked Germany's collapse. Cologne lay in ruins behind him. Allied bombing had destroyed nearly 85% of the city. Entire neighborhoods had vanished. Only skeletons of buildings remained. Yet one structure still stood: Cologne Cathedral. Its twin Gothic towers rose above the destruction like sentinels watching the end of an empire. Dead soldiers lay in the streets. Burned-out vehicles blocked intersections. Smoke drifted through the shattered skyline. Rose walked through the ruins that evening. His aide followed closely. Snipers were still active. Rose did not care. He wanted to see what his division had accomplished. The capture of Cologne was a major victory. It was the first major German city to fall to American forces. Eisenhower mentioned it in his daily briefing. But Rose did not celebrate. He was already looking east. Beyond the Rhine lay the Ruhr, Germany's industrial heart. Steel mills, coal mines, weapons factories. As long as the Ruhr remained in German hands, the war could continue. Allied strategy was clear. Encircle the Ruhr. Trap everything inside. Destroy Germany's ability to resist. Rose's division would play a key role. On March 24th, he received his orders. The 3rd Armored Division would cross the Rhine, advance rapidly toward the city of Paderborn, and seal the northern edge of the encirclement. Speed was essential. German forces had to be trapped before they could escape. On March 25th, Rose met with his commanders. General Collins was present. So was Major General Pete Quesada of the 9th Air Force. They discussed the rapid advances already achieved by Allied forces. Rose made a promise. His division would reach Paderborn in 24 hours. His staff studied the maps. It seemed impossible. The distance was nearly 100 miles. Through enemy territory. No Allied armored division had ever advanced that far in a single day. Rose did not hesitate. He said it would be done. At dawn on March 29th, the 3rd Armored Division began moving. Columns of tanks rolled east. 3 combat commands advanced along parallel routes. Shermans rumbled forward at full speed. Infantry rode atop the tanks, gripping metal handles to keep from falling. German resistance was scattered. Many German units were retreating, attempting to avoid encirclement. Others were destroyed quickly. Roads lay open. Rose urged his commanders forward. Speed was everything. By noon, they had covered 40 miles. By late afternoon, they were approaching Paderborn. The division had advanced more than 90 miles in a single day. It was an unprecedented achievement. But German forces were not finished. Elements of the 116th Panzer Division had moved into the forests south of the city. Veteran tank crews, Tiger tanks. They waited in ambush. At dawn on March 30th, Rose prepared to continue the advance. His staff recommended sending reconnaissance units ahead first. Rose refused. He would go himself. At 7 o'clock hours, he climbed into his jeep at the head of Task Force Wellborn. The convoy was small. 5 vehicles. A Sherman tank led the way. Behind it, a reconnaissance jeep. Rose's jeep followed third. An armored car and motorcycle messenger completed the column. Rose sat in the front passenger seat. His driver was Technical Sergeant T. J. Shaw. Major Robert Bellinger, his aide, sat in the rear. They carried only personal weapons. Pistols. Submachine guns. No heavy protection. The convoy moved down a narrow forest road toward Kirchborchen. The trees closed in around them. Visibility was limited. German forces had been reported nearby. Rose wanted to find isolated American units. He wanted to restore control. At approximately 8 o'clock hours, gunfire erupted. German infantry opened fire from the woods. The lead Sherman halted instantly. Rose and his staff jumped into a roadside ditch. Bullets snapped through branches overhead. Then a German anti-tank gun fired. The shell struck the Sherman. The turret exploded. Flames erupted from the vehicle. Crewmen scrambled out. 3 never escaped. German tank engines growled in the forest. Heavy armor was closing in. Rose understood immediately. They were surrounded. The survivors ran back to their vehicles. Shaw started the jeep. The convoy turned into an open field, bouncing violently across frozen ground. They attempted to escape, but German armor blocked their path. As Rose's jeep returned to the road, they saw it. A Tiger tank. Massive. Immovable. It turned to face them. Escape was impossible. Shaw stopped the jeep. The Tiger's hatch opened. A German tank commander emerged. He pointed a machine pistol at them. Rose stepped out. He raised his hands. So did his aide. Standard surrender procedure. The German commander shouted in German. Rose wore his general's stars, clearly visible. He lowered his right hand slowly toward his holster. He was following protocol. He was removing his weapon to surrender it. The German opened fire. Short bursts from the MP-40 shattered the silence. Bullets struck Rose. He fell instantly. The highest-ranking American officer killed by enemy fire in Europe had died at the front, exactly where he had always chosen to be, leading his men. The gunfire struck Major General Maurice Rose with devastating force. Multiple rounds tore into his chest and head in rapid succession, the sound sharp and final in the cold forest air. He collapsed instantly, his body falling backward onto the frozen ground before he could finish the simple act of surrender. There was no time for words, no time for explanation. The most aggressive armored commander in the United States Army was dead within seconds. Behind him, Major Robert Bellinger and Technical Sergeant T.J. Shantz reacted on instinct. They turned and ran. The German tank commander did not fire again. He did not pursue them. His Tiger remained motionless, its engine rumbling quietly, as the 2 surviving Americans disappeared into the trees. Within 30 minutes, breathless and shaken, they reached American lines and delivered the report no one was prepared to hear. Major General Maurice Rose had been killed. The news moved rapidly up the chain of command. Within hours, 1st Army Headquarters received confirmation. General J. Lawton Lightning Joe Collins stood in silence as the message was read aloud. He had warned Rose repeatedly. He had told him to command from behind the front, to let his armored units scout ahead, to protect himself. Rose had ignored every warning. Now, at the very moment his division stood on the verge of sealing the Ruhr Pocket, the largest encirclement of German forces in the Western Front, the 3rd Armored Division had lost its commander. The following day, March 31st, a patrol returned to the site of the ambush. The German tanks had withdrawn during the night, leaving behind only silence and destruction. Rose's body lay beside the narrow road, near a small plum tree whose bare branches reached into the gray sky. His uniform was torn by 14 bullet wounds. Most had struck his chest and head. The men who recovered him did so with quiet reverence. No one spoke. There was nothing to say. Command passed immediately to Brigadier General Doyle Hickey. The mission could not stop. German forces were still attempting to escape the tightening Allied encirclement. Hickey issued his orders with clarity and urgency. The advance would continue. Task force elements returned to the ambush site, where American tanks engaged and destroyed the German armor responsible. By the afternoon of March 31st, American armored columns entered Paderborn. Heavy fighting followed, but the outcome was no longer in doubt. On April 1st, 1945, American forces linked with advancing units from the 9th Army east of the Ruhr industrial region. The encirclement was complete. More than 376,000 German soldiers were trapped inside the pocket. It was the largest single encirclement of enemy forces in Western Europe. 1st Army officially named it the Rose Pocket. Every soldier in the 3rd Armored Division understood the significance. Their commander had promised to reach Paderborn in 24 hours. He had kept that promise, even in death. An investigation began almost immediately. The United States Army needed to determine whether Rose's killing constituted a war crime. Witnesses testified that he had raised his hands in surrender, that he had begun to remove his sidearm as required by military protocol. But captured German soldiers described the moment differently. They spoke of confusion, of poor visibility beneath dense trees, of an American officer reaching toward his holster, of a tank commander who believed, in that fraction of a second, that he was about to be shot. Colonel Leon Jaworski led the investigation with precision and care. Physical evidence confirmed how quickly it had happened. Less than 30 seconds had passed between the jeep stopping and the fatal shots. The shadows of the forest concealed details. Rose's insignia may not have been visible. His movement, though intended for surrender, may have appeared threatening. The investigation reached its conclusion in June 1945. Major General Maurice Rose was killed in action, not executed, not murdered, killed in the chaos and uncertainty of war. A tragic misunderstanding. On April 3, 1945, Rose was buried at the Netherlands American Cemetery in Margareton. More than 2,000 soldiers from his division attended the funeral. They stood in silence beneath a gray sky as the man who had led them across France, Belgium, and Germany was lowered into the earth. A Star of David was initially placed above his grave, honoring his Jewish heritage. Later, his family requested a cross, reflecting his recorded religious affiliation. The war did not pause. The 3rd Armored Division continued its advance into Germany. Weeks later, they liberated the Dora-Mittelbau concentration camp. Thousands of prisoners had died there. Hundreds more clung to life. The division fought until the final weeks of the war. Germany surrendered on May 8, 1945. Victory had come, but Maurice Rose was not there to see it. He was 45 years old. He had served 28 years in uniform. He was the highest-ranking American officer killed by enemy fire in the European theater. Under his command, the 3rd Armored Division achieved milestones unmatched by any other American armored unit. They were the first to enter Germany, the first to breach the Siegfried Line, the first to capture Cologne, the fastest to advance deep into enemy territory. His leadership had been aggressive, relentless, fearless. Some called it reckless. The men who served under him called it necessary. They knew that Rose never asked them to face danger he would not face himself. He did not command from safety. He did not remain behind maps and radios. He led from the front. Always. After the war, his name lived on. Military installations were named in his honor. A hospital in Denver bore his name. A transport ship carried his legacy across oceans. Schools, airfields, and monuments ensured that future generations would remember. In 2022, a bronze statue was unveiled in his hometown. 10 feet tall, it shows him moving forward, leading unseen soldiers into battle. At its base, 2 simple words are engraved. Follow me. They were not just words. They were how he lived and how he died.